Rachel Harvey, and I'm the Peatlands Officer for Snowdonia National Park.
I'm Dion Roberts. I'm the Sustainable Management Scheme Officer for the Snowdonia National Park.
So we're up here at a little place called Bodlediad. So it's I think it's the second highest road pass in Wales, isn't it? And there's quite a lot of peatland around here.
Hell of a lot.
So it's quite squishy underfoot. If any of you walked up here, you might have got wet feet. You might have scrambled over some peat hags or little cliffs of peat. Yeah.
There's a lot of bikers coming around this way, so a lot of them see the hags in the distance and think, what on earth are those features in the middle of the open ground?
Yeah, and so we're up here on a quite misty and rainy day today. Not too cold.
No.
But we can't see very far today. So I've dragged you out here to do some surveying. We are looking at what ditches we can find that might still be open and looking at where the hags are.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of hags today, a lot of ditches that need blocking, so plenty of work for Rachel to do over the next few months. So what is a peatland anyway?
That's quite a good question. I suppose we probably should start with that. Well, in a nutshell, a peatland is where we find peat. And they're usually quite wet areas. But to get a bit more of a detailed answer, I went to go and speak with Jack and Rob from National Peatland Action Programme, based at NRW, to find out some more.
Shemai, hi, my name's Rob Bacon. I'm a Senior Specialist Officer working on the National Peatland Action Programme in Wales.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack Simpson. I have the same role as Rob, working in the National Peatland Action Programme that's led by Natural Resources Wales.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, great to talk to you guys. So, I mean, first basic question: what are peatlands?
Okay. So peatlands are habitats that effectively form peat. They're wet, and by their nature, therefore, they're very waterlogged. And so what you get on a peatland is very poor decomposition rates of plant material, and that plant material basically accumulates over time and forms the peat that makes up the peatland. There's low oxygen conditions because it's waterlogged. It decomposes slowly and partially, and just slowly puts down layer upon layer upon layer until you get this profile of peat that forms underneath the vegetation layer. Wales has got a really fantastic array of different peatland types, and they're all determined by their setting and how they actually receive their water. And how they receive the water determines the chemistry of that water, so the nutrients and the pH within that water. And that in turn dictates which plants can thrive and survive in those settings. So they can be really quite diverse. Bogs only receive rainfall. That's the only water they get. So they're very low in nutrients, and they're a type of peatland. They're a rain-fed peatland. You get two main types of bog. You've got blanket bog, and that typically forms in the uplands. And as the name suggests, it kind of blankets the hills. So it's at the very top of the catchment. It receives all the rainfall, and the peatland forms over the tops of those hills and mountains. And the UK has actually got about, I think, 13% of the world's blanket bog, and it's the more common source of bog in Wales. A rarer type of bog we get is raised bog, and those are typically confined to specific settings where you've got either depressions or floodplains. And raised bogs form over time, so they'll have had a prior history as something else, maybe as a swamp or as a fen, and then gradually over time the peat profile will have built up and up and up and up and up until eventually the surface vegetation is so high and proud, so they dome, as it were. They're like a very slow souffle. They kind of dome, and then they separate themselves off from all other water influences apart from the rainfall that falls on them. And so those are your two main bog types that only get rainfall. You then also get fen. So fen peatlands do receive rainfall, but they also have groundwater and surface water inputs as well. So they tend to have slightly more nutrients, although they're still very nutrient poor. And you get acidic fens, which tend to be supplied with water that's slightly acidic in nature, so possibly from a bog upslope. And you also get alkaline fens, that's the other type. Their water has a slightly higher pH, that's more basic in nature, and that can often be from upwellings from springs or something that are permeating out of calcareous bedrock. So the peatlands in Wales and the Northern Hemisphere in general, the main building blocks for those are the sphagnum mosses. They're the main components. But you get peatlands all over the world, and in the tropics, I think the peat profile is often formed by leaf litter because they're often peat bogs within woodland environments. And then places like New Zealand, for example, you've got they're called Brosiect bogs because the plant that forms the peat profile in those situations, they're called wire rushes or bamboo rushes, which are part of the Brosiectaceae family. So peat bogs are made from different plant material depending on whereabouts you are in the world.
So there's loads of different types of peat bog, and I suppose here in Wales we've mostly got the blanket bog, and the common feature of peat bogs is they're wet and they have peat, which is this dark soil that you get, which is partly decomposed plant material.
Yeah, it is. It's basically soil that's formed in a very wet environment with minimal oxygen available. So yeah, the decomposition is just different and never really completed.
Unlike our compost bins in the garden, which sort of makes a nice brown soil.
Exactly.
So what's all the fuss about these peatlands? We're hearing about them a lot. So why are peatlands important?
Yeah, we've definitely increasingly recognising like the huge range of benefits they give us, and healthy peatlands are going to be vital in addressing the nature emergency. And yeah, they are incredibly important. From the nature perspective, they're rare. So by the very nature, they need a lot of rainfall or a lot of water, and they need to be waterlogged all year round. And there's not many places like that. So in Wales, they only cover about 4% of the Welsh landscape. So it's quite a small proportion. And because they're rare and limited in their distribution, we've reflected that in the designated site series, which is basically the protection that we afford by law some of the best wildlife sites in Wales. So they're designated as sites of special scientific interest. They're rare in nature, and as a result, they also contain a really unique array of wildlife that is specially adapted to thrive in these sort of wet, slightly acidic, nutrient-poor environments. And by association, a lot of those species are also rare and threatened and declining. So on blanket bogs, you've got lots of birds that have of importance, so hen harriers and golden plovers and curlews and snipe, jack snipes. You get short-eared owls and all sorts of nice bird life in these settings. And then the plants, you've got the sphagnum mosses and all manner of really weird and wonderful plants. You've got cranberries and bog rosemaries and bog myrtles, which are plants people may have heard of. But then you get these carnivorous plants as well. So you've got the sundews and the butterworts and bladderworts, which all sort of, because they're in such a low nutrient environment, they've evolved to basically hunt insect prey and what have you. And you know, the list goes on. There's rare invertebrates, there's the fen raft spider and large heath butterfly. So they support all kinds of wildlife. But on top of that, from sort of a wider environmental perspective, they filter our water, they store water. A healthy bog definitely slows the rate that water enters into a catchment, as opposed to a damaged or a drained bog where the water will run off it faster. And in the same vein, they release less sediment as well compared with a damaged bog. But the most significant environmental benefit they provide is they're exceptional at storing carbon. So because of the slow way the peat forms, it's got a really high organic carbon content. It's very dense, and that's why peat in the past was used as fuel and used for burning, because it burns real slow. It's probably somewhere in between sort of coal and wood in its carbon content. And you know, the world's peatlands cover 3% of the land area, but in that 3%, they contain twice as much carbon as the forests of the world. So they are really, really significant carbon stores. They've just discovered one in Congo, in the Congo Basin. It's 7 times the size of Wales, and they've estimated that it contains as much carbon as all the trees in the entire Congo Basin.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So yeah, a well hydrated, healthy bog basically accrues and adds to the peat profile. So it's effectively absorbing carbon. Whereas on the flip side, a damaged bog is giving off carbon dioxide and is emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And in Wales, 4% of the land cover holds about 30% of Wales's soil carbon. So it really makes good sense to preserve this peatland resource, just because it is the most efficient and effective way of locking up carbon, bearing in mind the climate emergency.
Okay. So yeah, really, really important for carbon stores. So we've got this big carbon store. What kind of problems have we got with our peatlands? Why is there so much focus on them? Why do we need to do a lot of work on them?
In Wales, only 12% is in favourable condition. We need to reverse habitat loss and reverse the poor condition of the remaining amount. So what's causing the problem, or what has caused it? And I think the current condition of the Welsh peatland resource reflects the long legacy of human modification and management. Historically, the value of peatlands was viewed differently. In the past, they were very important for fuel. I think Rob mentioned peat cutting. So that was a very important fuel before coal was available. There were also important areas for grazing, and attempts were made for growing timber. The problems of managing peatlands like this historically is it wasn't understood. More recently, the way society has valued peatlands, it's changed. We now appreciate them for the value to the environment, the role that they play in carbon storage, the way that they sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and the unique biodiversity that they support. Rob mentioned the full range of the sort of environmental benefits and services that the peatlands offer, but they only do that when they're in good ecological condition. So one of the single most important factors for a peatland to be in good condition is the water table. That is what would naturally resist change. It's what would make a peatland more resilient to problems thrown at it. So an ecosystem that would be in poor condition might be more stressed, less able to resist problems that they encounter. So the range of problems that peatlands have faced and continue to face are drainage for grazing, drainage for tree planting, small areas, but one of the biggest impacts is erosion to peatlands. So that's the forces of wind and water that wash peat away. Peat is quite slow growing, isn't it? It forms at about 1 millimetre per year. So for a metre of peat to have formed, that's taken about 1,000 years. And it doesn't take that long for peat to erode. You can lose massive depths quite quickly. So one of the other problems, as well as drainage and erosion, is undergrazing or the lack of management, particularly when a site's already been drained, because you've got problematic native species like manylu or purple moorgrass, which is quite a tall growing grass which would naturally be on peatlands, which outcompetes the native bog species that you'd typically find, and it becomes quite dominant. A historic issue that we've mentioned is domestic peat cutting, where peat has been harvested for fuel. And going back to the question, I suppose, what are the problems that peatlands face? A quite new or future problem is climate change. Obviously, the climate here in Wales historically is wet and cool, and that's well suited to peatlands. Over the past few years, we are seeing changes in our climate, and we're seeing quite large amounts of rainfall in a very short amount of time, which can further impact areas of bare or eroding peat and make the impacts worse. But that can also make delivering restoration, it can make it a lot harder to achieve that favourable or good condition bog. At the opposite end of the scale to heavy rainfall, you've got prolonged dry periods. So like at the start of the COVID lockdown, we went from like February, we had like really heavy rainfall, to quite a dry couple of months that were really warm with quite a small amount of rainfall. And that makes it, again, difficult for typical peatland species to survive. And the other impact of prolonged dry period, the water table isn't as high as it should be, and the peat is drying out. And when the peat is dry, it's able to decompose, which gives off the greenhouse gases.
So our peatlands are actually emitting a lot of carbon in greenhouse gases rather than storing it.
If they're not wet enough, they will be giving off a lot of carbon. Yeah.
Right.
You had to be looking. It's almost like a safeguarding operation, because they form so slowly that they're like a tortoise in the hare. You know, they very, very slowly accrue carbon, and you know, a millimetre a year. It's not masses, but what they're sat on is, you know, it's truly ancient. You know, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of years worth of peat formation that's just sat there, and if you don't safeguard it and protect it and stop the drainage and the erosion and what have you, then it is just going to deteriorate and make the issue worse. So yeah, it is a case of the biggest onus is to stop them deteriorating, and then once you've got them fixed, they'll do you a favor, but don't expect it overnight. Like they don't turn things around quickly, but yeah, I mean they're ancient ecosystems. They're fascinating.
Yeah. So what are we doing about that? What are we doing in Wales about protecting and maybe even fixing our peatlands?
I think a lot's been done today, hasn't it? There's protected sites. So Rob before mentioned sites of special scientific interest, special areas of conservation, national nature reserves. There's been previous agri-environment support, so glass tier scheme, tier goval, and other land management interventions have been highly beneficial, but there's still been a lot of room for a national programme of coordinated activity for Wales. There's the Welsh Government ministerial commitment in Wales that's ambitious and focused on ensuring all peatlands with semi-natural vegetation are subject to favourable management. And I think there's a minimum area of 30,000 hectares of the 90,000 hectares of peatland we have in Wales, and a second target of restoring a minimum of 25%, so 5,000 hectares of the most modified areas of peatland in Wales. Myself and Rob work as part of the National Peatland Action Programme. That's Wales's first National Peatland Action Programme, and this outlines a plan of action to be taken over the next 4 years. The project began in April 2020 and the funding comes from Welsh Government. The main aim is to deliver peatland restoration across Wales and provide national coordination. We have an aim of delivering 600 to 800 hectares of restoration per year, and it's not just direct delivery by NRW. Key emphasis goes on working with partners such as national parks, the RSPB, National Trust, to name a few, and that aim is to deliver restoration at a large scale. Delivering it in partnership with the partners, you can deliver it at a much greater rate. And I think a good example of that, Rachel, is the work delivered by you and your colleagues at Snowdonia National Park Authority last year. I think you delivered over 1,000 hectares on 20 sites, didn't you?
Yeah, we did quite a bit through what we call it NPAP. It's just a bit easier to say. It's worth noting that at the same time we were finishing off the Welsh Peatlands Sustainable Management Scheme project, which was another peatland project that ran for 3 years across Wales. So yeah, we've got used to restoring peatlands in Snowdonia. Yeah, so it's really great working with you guys again this year.
So that's working with partners. So I said we've got like a 600 to 800 hectare target of restoration per year as part of the programme. And then myself and Rob in-house within NRW, we aim to deliver about 200 hectares per year. And that's what Rob and myself do most of the time. And I think that provides a good overview of the activity that's going on across Wales currently. And it provides a fantastic opportunity for the future management of peatland sites.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot going on. So it's great that we're looking into our peatlands and really protecting them and restoring them. So yeah, it's great news. Well, that's some really good information there, guys. I feel like I've learned some more about peatlands. And yeah, so thanks for your time.
Right, so that's a good synopsis of what a peatland is. So, Rachel, do we have many of these peatlands in Snowdonia?
Well, I mean, Snowdonia being quite wet and having quite a lot of hills, we do actually have quite a lot of peatlands, and a lot of them are the blanket bogs that blanket the tops of those hills. Many of you might have walked across them and cursed as you got your boots stuck in them. But actually, only 12% of Snowdonia is covered in peatlands, and as I say, most of them are blanket bogs. We've got actually about 30% of Wales as peatlands here.
Quite a bit then.
Yeah,
it's quite a bit.
So it's quite a big chunk of Wales peatlands. We've already mentioned the importance of carbon in peatlands. So in Snowdonia, despite only covering 12% of the land surface, they actually hold 52% of the soil carbon.
Wow.
So a lot more carbon than all the other soils put together. So they're really important for carbon. And we've also got places like the Mignite, which is really important on a Europe-wide scale for lots of breeding birds and biodiversity. So yeah, we've got a lot of really, really nice peatlands here.
Excellent. So you say that we've got places like Mignites, which is important for, well, internationally or nationally for peatlands. So what are we doing with these peatlands?
We're doing a mix of things. So today we're out surveying. We're checking what's there. So I've actually been over this site looking at aerial photography. I'm just ground truthing that today, see if I've made any mistakes and things like that. Yeah. And we also check the vegetation and the peat depth. This is a really good idea of what we've actually got here. But a big part of our work is peatland restoration. So we've had a few projects over the years. There was a life project in the Berwins quite a few years ago now.
Quite close to here then?
Yeah, quite close to here, yeah. In fact, they blocked some of the ditches up here, I think. More recently, we've had the SMS Welsh Peatlands project, so that finished last year. So we restored peatlands all across Wales, actually, and quite a few here in Snowdonia. And now we're working with the National Peatland Action Programme to restore more peatlands.
So plenty to do then?
Plenty to do, yeah.
So you say that we're doing this restoration work. So could you define or try and explain what actual restoration is?
Yeah, so there's a few different things we can do. So we have a few issues on our peatlands. We've got drainage, and this is usually from artificial drainage ditches that were put in quite a few decades ago now, when people sort of thought that peatlands were wasteland, would be better drained so they could get more sheep on there.
Okay.
The science has moved on a bit, and we've realised actually that's quite bad and releasing lots and lots of carbon. So our peatlands are a net emitter. And so we're going back and blocking up those artificial drains with peat dams usually, but we can use timber or stone as well. The other thing we've mentioned right at the start was all these peat hags that we can see. So these are little cliffs of peat. Sometimes they're only half a metre, sometimes they're 2 or 3 metres tall, and they just constantly erode. They're often along gully edges where there's been drainage, and we reprofile those. So we take the turf off and then we level them out a bit.
Okay.
So they go from vertical to about 45 degrees, and then we put the turf back down again. So it goes from really difficult cliffy terrain to Teletubby land.
Does that make it safer for livestock and stuff as well then?
Yeah, livestock and people. It's much easier to walk around. Yeah, and you get cleaner sheep as well. Yeah. So and then with the bigger gullies, they're naturally draining, so we try not to deal with them too much, but we can put what we call baffles in, just to sort of make the water meander and stay on the peatland a bit more. And then the other thing, of course, that we do is we take off conifer trees from peatlands. So conifers act a bit like straws, and they sort of help drain the peatlands and often have furrows and stuff that were dug. So we do fell the trees and we take off conifer trees that shouldn't be there as well, so from nearby plantations.
Right, okay. So that sounds good.
Yeah, so I actually went out to a place called Blaenau-Coed, which is on the Mignite that we talked about. It's near Ysbyty and it's a site that's owned by National Trust and it's managed by RSPB. So they've been doing quite a lot of work there with us as partners over the years. And so I went out there with Martin Clift from RSPB to try and work out how it's actually worked on that site.
I'm Martin from the RSPB, and we're up on Blaenau-Coed. Blaenau-Coed is a National Trust land tenanted to the Blaenau-Coed farm, and this site is a beautiful peatland. And when we got here, started work, there were ditch blocking, which had been going on for the past few years, and we started from there. And we looked at the site in our sort of partnership of what else can we do? What can we do to really add the value and make this blanket bog sing as it should do? So we worked with a local contractor who came up here with a sort of excavator. We tried to solve some of these things with him on site, and we started blocking.
So when was it that you blocked those ditches? And are you still doing those now, or have you moved on to something else?
Yeah, so we started on this mix of ditches, mix of gullies, mostly gullies, but we started in around 2017, 4 or 5 years ago now, and We are still doing it, so we haven't put a huge amount of effort in. We've very much worked to bring everyone in the partnership with us on a sort of journey of this is new, this is experimental, so it's work that's carrying on. It's not short term.
So we've been walking around today. We've seen some of the big gullies that are on site that are also draining the peatland alongside the ditches that you blocked a few years ago. So I can see already there's some big pools going on in these gullies. We've blocked them. They're not very deep. They've got lots of sphagnum there. So yeah, what's the plan this year? Are you going to continue working in these gullies?
Yes, we'll carry on these. I mean, as you mentioned, the sort of pools that were there, that was something that was missing from this site before we did this work, and it really starts to paint that. You've sort of described the value all of a sudden in doing this work, and we're creating something new here. Those pools are where in the summer you'll see the dragonflies will be quartering all the way around them. You'll see the invertebrate populations. We walked past a curlew nest a little while ago, and they nested right in the middle of one of the pools we created. So all of a sudden we've got that. We're working towards the value that Blanket Bog can really have. Yes, we'll be carrying on this winter. We've got a contractor lined up for about a week's time.
Oh, so it's starting pretty soon then.
Yeah. It'll be nice and cold. We'll have down jackets and about 3 other layers and some coffee.
Yeah, that's the plan. I can see along the edges of the gullies here as well. There's cliffs of peat where you can see the bare peat, and these are called hags. So what have you done to address these hags here?
Yes, there's a whole network of them. How they're formed is quite a complicated picture. Some are formed away from man-made features, some are sort of from little variations in the peat depth. And what they create is a sort of channel for water to flow, but also expose the peat to the air, so the peat can oxidise and run away in the water. It's dissolved. So yes, we've been a mix of, if they're on the edge of a gully, we can stop the water flowing, so we can disrupt that erosion process. In other areas where we can't, we want to try and make sure that channel is not there and the peat doesn't oxidise straight to the air. So we've covered up the bare peat. When these hags do form, they are very vertical, and the reason that their peat is nothing can grow on that. So what we've tried to do is bring the angle down to something like a very steep road or path, that sort of angle, something that things can grow on. So we've got an excavator to come in. The bucket has pulled away at the surface, created a nice flat bank, and then it's a bit of a skillful job to try and tease the vegetation so that we can cover up the bare peat that we've created there. So it's a combination of those two things.
Yeah, I mean, some of the hags over there are actually looking pretty good. You can see they're much less of an angle, and they've got vegetation all over them. It looks quite easy to walk up and down them, actually, compared to falling off them if I was a sheep, for example.
Yeah, it's a tricky area for the contractors to work. It does present lots of challenges in terms of what the teeth bucket can do, and it is variable. Some of them on this site haven't worked as well. Some of them you can barely tell they're there anymore. You just walk up a bit of a slope and then realise I've just gone over a hag.
So you mentioned working over the winter. I mean, typically on peatlands we always work over winter just because we're avoiding bird breeding season. But it does present challenges. You've already mentioned it's cold and you need lots of coffee. But what other problems have you found up here working in peatland?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is rain and the cold, and Blanket Bog is a habitat that relies on water, so it's a lot easier for it to be as wet as it should be in the winter, but because that's the time that we need to come with an excavator, which can be 5 tonnes, there could be more than that in places, that needs to be able to move around the habitat at the wettest time of the year, so that in the driest time of the year, in the sort of June, July, those invertebrates will be able to live here. So we're very much avoiding any sort of disturbance to the habitat or the creatures that live here, but that does have challenges, and the winter is the time when it's a lot harder to track around. It's prone to storms coming through, and some of those can damage some of the features. So yeah, it's lots of challenges. We've seen little bits of failure, which we've had to repair, but we're learning all the time.
Yeah, and it's definitely looking wetter up here compared to when I first came up here, so it's definitely working. And yeah, as I say, the curlew have come back, so that's a really big sign that you're doing something right.
Yeah, it's a combination of things. It's sometimes hard to get a grasp on just how measurable this is, but you can just see from looking at it the difference, the value that's there now for biodiversity. And it's still part of the working farm, and the sheep are here every summer. I was chatting with the farmer last time I was up here, and seeing the sheep when he was gathering them.
So what's next for the site then?
Yeah, so this winter we're doing some more sort of work with the contractor. We'll carry on blocking the gullies. We'll create those pools and see that. We'll carry on the partnership. This is a partnership between several organisations, the park and MLW and National Trust as the landowner, and most importantly the tenant here. So we'll carry that on, and it's a little bit of, we've got an area on this site which is a sort of demonstration of where we can go with Peatland now and what it can really look like. And what we need to carry on with that is bringing decision makers up to this site so they can see the value of it. They will understand it as soon as they're here, and they need to be able to sort of encourage that in where agricultural support's going.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly learned a lot by helping you guys out on this site with a different method. So yeah, it's a really great showcase site.
It's not a site where everything we've done is ideal. We've made mistakes. We're all human. We've explored. We've encouraged. This is a new area, really. This site has a lot of peat on it, and we've decided that to have as low impact as possible in doing this gully, we wanted to use peat as much as possible. But peat is a brilliant substance, but it's not an ideal one for building. It's quite soft. So there have been little challenges there, but we're confident we're on the right track.
Thanks for telling me all about it.
Absolutely.
So that sounds like a good, interesting project, but also a lot of work. So RSPB, they're a big organisation all over the whole UK with lots of resources. Snowdonia is owned by single landowners. So how does this work?
Yeah, it's something that we've been working with quite a few landowners. And actually, I spoke to Lisa, who owns this peatland here that we're on now, because we've restored this site. And so I went to have a chat with her to see what she thought about it. Yeah, so I'm Lisa Roberts, and I farm here with my husband Sean and family on Pennant Farm near Mawndiroedd. Great, so what actually made you want to restore your peatland in the first place? Well, having worked with farmers who've enhanced their carbon store through planting parcels of trees on their farms, I realised maybe that we had an asset on our farm which we've always overlooked, and that was the peatland on the hill. So I knew there was a large or huge capacity for storing carbon on good condition peat, and at Bodlediad, I knew again there was some hags and exposed peat there, so I knew there was some potential then to increase that carbon store there really. So after taking some research on how to undertake restoration, I found and came across the Welsh Peatland SMS project, and then thought, well, this is the opportunity really for us to get on and restore the peatland here at Pennant, and then suppose learn from the project. Yeah, so we've been talking about a site that's owned by National Trust, run by RSPB, so it's big organisations involved. But a lot of Snowdonia is owned by single landowners like yourself, who don't have those massive staff resources and things. So how did you actually go about getting your peatland restored? Yeah, so I suppose we were really lucky. We were involved with the SMS project. We had a good network of support to start off. The first thing we did was assess the peat depths and measured out and mapped out the hags and ditches on the site. So again, we had lots of help through the project to do that. And then last winter then, we had contractors that came up to Bodlediad with 2 diggers and reprofiled the hags on the mountain over a couple of weeks' time. They also blocked a ditch right at the top of the mountain as well. Yeah, it was very quick work undertaken and quick to recover as well. Couldn't believe really how quick the vegetation and the mosses, how they started going back there nearly straight away. And actually by now you can't really tell at all that anybody's been up there really in terms of, sort of the contractors. It's all really healed over nicely. So, yeah. Oh, that sounds really great. So, I mean, you can see that it's healing quite well. But have you had to change the way you farm the land up there at all because of the restoration? No, nothing has changed. That was really, really important to us when we even thought about undertaking any restoration work. We wanted to continue with our main aim as a business, which was to produce food. So whatever we did in terms of peatland restoration had to go hand in hand with that. Our stocking rates haven't changed at all at the moment, and the same number of sheep have been kept there at Bodlediad. And we hope that will continue for the foreseeable future. We've no plans to change that at all. I think it's really important that we keep grazing these mountains to manage the vegetation and promote then the biodiversity up there. Yeah, okay, yeah. you don't want a monoculture of one particular plant species. It's quite important to have some grazers up there to help manage that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, again, we've obviously had to reduce many years ago. We've reduced stocking sort of up at the top step way before my time, but through agri-environment schemes. But we certainly wouldn't want to dip anywhere below what we are sort of grazing now, really.
Yeah. Would you say the land it's harder for the animals to move around on there, or is it the same as it was before? Is it easier?
There's definitely there's quite a bit of heather on some parts of the mountain, which is sort of taken over, especially on Bolchadroes. We put some cattle up there actually a few years back now, a few summers back I should say, and certainly I think that grazing cattle would help with that sort of vegetation to try and keep on top of it really. But certainly yes, I think if left, certainly it is making it harder for sheep to move around, and the grazing quality there maybe will reduce if left really.
So with the restoration works themselves, how have the livestock actually coped in those areas?
Really well, actually. I mean, we're lucky in Bolchadroes. We've only got sort of that one main ditch we've had to block up, so it's still got a big parcel of land to sort of graze and things, so that hasn't affected them much. But I suppose we noticed sort of shearing this year. I could tell with even just handling the fleeces which sheep could come down from Bolchadroes and from our other mountains. The fleeces were very clean. There was no peat in the fleeces at all. It was really nice actually to wrap that wool compared to the other sheep really, where there was so much more peat in the fleeces really. So yeah, massive difference there, absolutely.
Yeah, so by covering the peat, they're not lying in that bare peat. I mean, I know sheep like a warm place next to a peat hag, so we got rid of all those for them. But yeah, I'm glad it's made them a bit cleaner and easier.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So how do you plan to maintain this peatland going forward? How will you stop it getting back to the state it was in?
Well, the hill on Bolchadroes is part of a SNPA, or Site of Special Scientific Interest. And we are very fortunate then, of course, to have National Resources Wales to support us on monitoring that site anyway. So we're very lucky that we can have that sort of support really to sort of manage the land, and obviously we'll continue to graze as well. But to help with the maintenance cost of the peatland restoration, we actually validated the carbon captured at Bolchadroes following the peatland restoration and sold 2,335 tonnes of carbon on the voluntary peatland carbon market, or through the peatland code. So this will help us to finance any maintenance required in the future. But although this is a great way to fund the maintenance, it is also important that I think we consider, first of all, the carbon footprint of our own farm first, before going on to selling any carbon credits on the market. Obviously, once you've sold your carbon credit or your carbon, you can't count it back again against your business. But, I think with the ambitions going forward of achieving net zero globally, I think it's really important that we know where we're at in terms of our carbon footprint, act on it where we can, and sort of work like this. Really, I think it is really important. We've got a huge resource on our mountains. I think 90,000 hectares of Wales, I think I've heard, is covered with peatlands. So it's a massive asset, and I think work like this is a great way to try and achieve, help us achieve net zero.
Yeah, no, restoring peatlands is a great way to reduce emissions and, on our way to net zero, hopefully. Well, thank you very much for your time, and, good luck with it.
Thank you.
So that was a bit of a crash course on peatlands and what we're doing here in Snowdonia. I hope that's helped you, Dion.
100%, yeah. It's definitely opened my eyes to a bit more of what we do here, and also next time I'm up in the uplands, I'll certainly think more about the peatland and what great work we do here.
Yeah. And if you want to find out more, you can take a look at our website. There's stuff on our peatland work there, and if you look on the NRW website, there's information on the National Peatland Action Programme as well.